I'm glad to be here this morning. I'm thankful to be here every morning. Some of you know snippets of my testimony. Some of you know about me. But today I want you to see into my life. And there are a lot of OMG moments, I tell you that to begin with. I was born into a family of 4 children, all girls, and I was the baby. My family was a happy family in the eyes of a 4 or 5-year-old child, but there was a lot going on I didn't understand. And the only memory I have of my father, vivid memory of my father, is I had on this little red corduroy jumpsuit, and I was holding around his leg. I didn't want him to leave the house because I knew when he came back he'd be different, and I didn't understand what that difference was. But my father was an alcoholic, and my mother stayed with him. She really loved him. She never stopped loving him, but he beat her up, put her in the hospital, broke her nose, and after that she was afraid of him, and she said that's the end. So they were divorced when I was 6 years old, and my world came crashing down. My father was my world. I loved him with a love like a father and daughter. And from that time on, I was always seeking something to fill that void. There was always this hole in my heart. And I tried so many different things. I'm just thankful that it wasn't in vogue to do marijuana or any of those things, because I would have tried those too. I tried to fill that hole that was in my heart, and nothing filled that void. I got married, and before I walked down the aisle that day on my grandfather's arm, I wanted to turn around and run away because I knew this wasn't the answer. And I cried on my wedding night because I knew that wasn't the answer. And so that's a year later is when I found out that I had cancer. And when the doctor told me that I couldn't have children, then I wanted to die. And I told him, I don't care if I live, if I can't have children, because that was my whole dream. Get married, have children, be happy. That was going to fill my void. And he said, you have to fight, Nina, you have to fight. In order to live, you have to fight. And I said, there's no fight in me, I don't care. But God cared. And he brought me through that surgery. And after surgery, I was in Atlanta doing treatments. And I had cobalt one day and radium the next, and massive doses of radiation. And there was a little girl on crutches. She must have been 8 or 9 years old, long brown ponytail, beautiful brown eyes. And she would just hop through the room, and one day somebody said, she's terminal. And she knows it. And I thought, that little girl she's happy, she's joyful. And here I am, and I'm just miserable. So I decided I wasn't going to be miserable anymore. But that still didn't fill that void in my heart. And I didn't believe in divorce, so I stayed with my husband until he started beating me. And then I thought, surely God didn't want me to live this way in fear of him and always being afraid. And so my marriage came to an end. After I had filed for divorce for physical and mental cruelty, he filed and said he didn't want a divorce. And then my family came to me and told me of all the affairs he had been having, of which I was unaware. I just figured if I was faithful, he would be faithful. Well, it didn't work that way. And he would call me half a woman and throw up to me the fact that I couldn't have children. And so he had to prove, because I wasn't a woman anymore, he had to prove that he was a man. Well, anyway, that all came to an end, and I was absolutely devastated. What is there? I thought this was going to make me happy. This was going to fill my heart. And by that time, I had already tried Christianity. When I was 8 years old, I heard the preacher preaching about God our Father. Oh, God wants to be my Father? And so I went forward to receive God as my Father. at 8 years old. That didn't fill that void. This isn't enough. And then when I was in youth camp in summer, I guess I was 14, I heard that you had to be baptized to be saved. I was in a Christian church, and they believed in baptism for salvation. And so I thought, well, I better get baptized because I'm not saved. And so the next day, when my friend went down to receive Christ, I went again. And the pastor asked me, did I just come with my friend? I said, no, I'm a sinner. I need to be saved. And I didn't understand this whole thing of Christianity, and it was never, ever, ever clear to me. So when my world ended, I was at the very bottom of the world, and anything that I'd ever hoped for or desired. I wrote to my sister, whose husband was a chaplain in the United States Army. They were stationed in Germany. And I just said, you know, all my life, all I've ever wanted is for somebody to love me. And everybody who's ever loved me leaves me. What can I do? And so they invited me to come and live with them. They had one more year left on his tour of duty in Germany. Their children were going to a missionary school in Germany. And so they invited me to come and live with them. But when I got there, I was amazed at what I saw. I met people who actually lived what they believed. They were kind, and they were open, and they accepted me as I was, warts and all. And they asked me to teach. And so as I taught, got there in August, September, I was just observing people, and I knew they had something I didn't have. And so in October, we were going to go on a retreat, and I was so excited because we were going to go to a castle in Switzerland, and we were going to stay in a turret, like medieval castle, and I was so excited to go. Well, I got out of bed on that Monday, and I hurt my back again, and I couldn't go. My brother-in-law said, well, just come and go with us. We're going to a military retreat. So I said, okay. I couldn't sit. I could either stand or lie down. I couldn't sit. So they had a family wagon, and I laid down in the back of that family wagon all the way to Berchtesgaden, West Germany, and about a 12-hour trip across Germany. So we got there, and I thought, well, I'll go to hear him preach. I guess that's the least I can do since they're paying my way this weekend. So it's a little chapel in Bavarian, Germany, and I went there, and I couldn't sit. So I would stand as long as I could, and then they had these wonderful wall heaters, and you could just stand up against that wall and get your back so nice and warm, but then I couldn't stand very long, so then I'd just lie down on the floor. And then I'd get up and stand by the heater again, and I'm down on the floor. So my brother-in-law came to me, and he said, well, since you're here, would you take the afterglow session? I said, sure. What's that? That was me. I could do anything. And so he said, well, it's just they gather around the piano and they sing songs and give testimonies, and they go and have cookies and hot chocolate and go to bed. I said, oh, sure, I can do that. I've been doing that for years. So, fine, I can do that. So we did that, and there was one girl, and she's sitting way in the very back, and I didn't like her looks. She wasn't my kind of person. She had butch haircut. She had on khaki pants, belted, with the shirt tucked in, and she was just not feminine at all, not attractive. But she didn't take part, and I didn't care. She was in the back of the room, and that was fine. So we went. I got to hurting. It was time to go. So we went and had cookies and hot chocolate, and I was on my way to my room, and she said, you know, I have something to share with you from the Lord. And I thought, I've had enough of God today. And I said, well, I'm going back to my room, and if you want to come, you can come. And she did. And so she came back to my room, and I got dressed in my pajamas, and I got under that wonderful German feather tick, and I snuggled down in it. I said, okay. And she said, do you have a Bible? And I said, yeah, it's over there in the drawer. I hadn't even taken it to the meeting. And she says, well, this doesn't mean anything to me, but God has told me I need to share this with you. And so she began to read Isaiah chapter 54. Sing, O barren woman, you who never bore a child. Burst into song. Shout for joy, you who are never in labor, because more are the children of the desolate woman than of her who has a husband, says the Lord. Enlarge the place of your tent. Stretch your tent curtains wide. Do not hold back. Lengthen your cords. Strengthen your stakes, for you will spread out to the right and to the left. Your descendants will dispossess nations and settle in their desolate cities. Do not be afraid. You will not suffer shame. Do not fear disgrace. You will not be humiliated. You will forget the shame of your youth and remember no more the reproach of your widowhood. Your Maker is your husband. The Lord Almighty is his name. The Holy One of Israel is your Redeemer. He is called the God of all the earth. The Lord will call you back as if you were a wife deserted and distressed in spirit, a wife who married young only to be rejected, says your God. For a brief moment I abandoned you, but with deep compassion I will bring you back. In a surge of anger I hid my face from you for a moment, but with everlasting kindness I will have compassion on you, says the Lord your Redeemer. To me, this is like the days of Noah, when I swore never again, the waters of Noah would never again cover the earth. So now I have sworn not to be angry with you, never to rebuke you again. Though the mountains be shaken and the hills be removed, yet my unfailing love for you will not be shaken, nor my covenant of peace be removed, says the Lord, who has compassion on you. O afflicted city, lashed by storms and not comforted, I will build you with stones of turquoise, your foundations with sapphires. I will make your battlements of rubies, your gates of sparkling jewels, and all your walls of precious stones. All your sons will be taught by the Lord, and great will be your children's peace. In righteousness you will be established. Tyranny will be far from you. You will have nothing to fear. Terror will be far removed. It will not come near you. If anyone attacks you, it will not be my doing. Whoever attacks you will surrender to you. See, it is I who created the blacksmith, who fans the coals into flames and forges a weapon fit for his work. And it is I who have created the destroyer to work havoc. No weapon forged against you will prevail, and you will refute every tongue that accuses you. This is the heritage of the servants of the Lord, and this is their vindication from me, declares the Lord. Wow. That was the answer to everything I had sought for all my life. I'd never read that. I'd gone to Carson Newman College, Baptist College. I'd studied Old and New Testament. I'd been in church. I'd been on revival teams. I'd been involved in church since I was 8 years old. But I'd never read that. Isaiah 53, suffering servant, everybody knows that. But I'd never read Isaiah 54. And when she read that night, my heart was broken. So the next morning when I went to that little chapel in Bavaria, Germany, I was standing in the back by the rope pool. They had a rope to call people to the service. I was standing back there, and my brother-in-law was preaching in Ephesians. Let the love of God go deep into you. You might know the depth and the width of his love. And I said, oh, God, that's what I want. Please, don't let me fail this time. I've tried so many times, God, I can't do it. Please, Lord, don't let me fail again. He said, all your life, you've been holding on. Let go, because I have you in the palm of my hand. And that's where I've been since October 24th, 1976. From that day forward, I've never doubted my salvation. Oh, I've had problems. Yes, I've had problems. I've had all sorts of things happen that would kill a lesser person. But you see, it's not me. It's Jesus in me. It's God in me. It's the promise he gave me. He will never leave me. He will never forsake me. He will always be there with me to guide me. And that filled me with such joy. And I remember I'd be driving along the German countryside, and I would look up and I'd see the clouds, and I would just pray out to the Lord in praise and say, oh God, I'm as free as those clouds. I'm free. I'm free to be what you've really created me to be. And so that started my life with him. And that was my first year at Black Forest Academy. So I worked there for 9 years, and God gave me many children from all over the world. And I have grandchildren all over the world from my beautiful students at BFA, which I love Facebook because that's how I keep in touch with them. But I learned so much. I knew so little. I had head knowledge, but you know there's only 18 inches between heaven and hell, between what's in your heart and what's in your head. I had it all here, but nothing here. Well, God had opened my heart, and I was alive to him. So I would always sit on the front, which is, you know, is my custom even now. Now it's because I can't hear. Then it was because I was like taking it all in. And because we were a missionary school, kids of missionary parents, we had the best speakers from all over the world. They would come to do a trip in Europe, and they would include the Black Forest Academy in their itinerary, and they would come and preach. And I was on the front row, just taking it all in. And I mean, men of God who were deep in the Word. And then I would come home on furlough. Well, that's another story, how I got here. But Wayne Barber on this side, you better believe, and Jan Silvius as my Sunday school teacher, those days were days of just soaking it in. And so I grew, I began to grow, and God began to grow me, and I didn't know what was next, but I knew whatever it was that it would be of the Lord, because he's promised that he would never forsake me, that he would never leave me, and that I would have his peace. And this is something that I can't explain to people, because I've lost count, 47 surgeries now. And people say, well, how can you go through that? How can you deal with all that? And I said, I can't explain it to you. It's the peace of the Lord that's in my heart. It's just a peace that he promised me that day in Germany, that's never left me. And am I where I want to be now? No. Never thought I'd be where I am now. But that's where he's allowed me to be. And is there peace there? Yes, there is peace there, because it's his place for me. And that little room is filled with peace. It's just a happy place to be, because I choose to make it that way. So I continued to follow the Lord and to grow at Black Forest Academy, and had wonderful relationships with the teachers, with the students. They were my family. They became my family. I didn't get to come home very often because furloughs were expensive, crossing the ocean was expensive, and you have to realize I didn't go as a missionary. I became a missionary after I got there. They were ever so glad when I went home that weekend from Berchtesgaden, Germany. They were ever so glad to find out that their missionary teacher had become a Christian, because that's when I was saved. So I started teaching in end of August, and this was October when I got saved. So I sort of came in everything by the back door. But anyway, I stayed there, and I learned so much, and I taught so much. Can you imagine teaching biology without a microscope or without any equipment whatsoever? I had a pack of straight pins and a cardboard box that I cut up into rectangles, and we'd go out and find a worm, stick that worm on there with the pins, and we'd all look at that worm. Jeanette knows what I'm talking about, but can you imagine? Not even a microscope. We'd go out and catch our frogs to the pond. We went out to caught our frogs, brought in the frogs, anesthetized them, watched them while they were still alive. We kept them asleep with ether or alcohol, guess what we used. Anyway, we learned. And it was a Canadian school based on Canadian curriculum, Saskatchewan, Canada. And in your junior year, 50% of your entire grade comes from one test at the end of the year. I'd never seen that test. I didn't know what was on that test. I didn't know how to prepare my students. All I knew to do was to teach the best I could. Do you know that my students were in the upper 90th percentile, like 93, 94? Never had a microscope. I mean, it's just amazing what God did. We learned together, and it was exciting. Every day was an adventure because I never knew what they were going to bring me in, and I had to pretend I wasn't squeamish. So they'd bring, "Whoa, look, what's this, Miss Stephenson?" I have no idea, but we'll see if we can find it. And we would, we didn't have computers then either. There were no computers, so it was fun. So that part of my life was what I call my seminary training. I would come home on furlough, and I remember one time I was in Florida, and I had on my little German dirndl. I was all dressed up in my green and white checkered German dirndl. And somebody came up to me after the service when I had spoken, and they said, "Where did you go to seminary?" And I said, and excuse me? I didn't go to seminary. And they would look at me like, how can you be a missionary if you didn't go to seminary? And God gave me the answer one day. Somebody came up and said, "And where did you go to Bible school?" And I said, "I went to God's Bible school, and I had the same teacher that Jesus had. The Holy Spirit was my teacher." And there was no after that, there was no question. Because God had prepared me in a very special setting, a very special seminary, and everything that I knew came from those years, 9 years. And during the summer times, I was asked one summer to go with a group of young people into Greece and Yugoslavia on an evangelistic team, singing with a Serbo-Croatian pastor. And so we would sing in Serbo-Croatian, a language I didn't speak. None of us spoke it. We sang it. And then we would sort of just fade away and he would preach. Because if we stayed, they wanted to talk with us afterwards, and we couldn't talk with any of them. We didn't speak their language. And so those summers were also very learning experiences and stretching experiences, and took me into parts of the world I never even dreamed of visiting, much less being a part of. Yugoslavia, Hungary, Czechoslovakia. These are words that I just knew from a map. And I was living in those countries. I was ministering in those countries. And so after that one summer, they told me to pray for a leader for the next summer, because they needed someone. They saw that this ministry was very helpful, and they wanted somebody to lead these teams. So I prayed every day. "Oh God, please send the right person. Oh God, please send the right person." God sent me. So that's how I got there. It's dangerous to pray, "God, please do this." I got the same thing when I was at BFA, and we needed an English teacher, and I knew the importance for these kids who had grown up in German or Spanish or French schools to study English, because they were coming back to Canada or the United States to learn in English. They had to have a good foundation. They needed grammar. They needed a good teacher, and we had an excellent teacher who was leaving. And so I prayed, "Oh God, please send a replacement for Jeannie. Somebody who knows grammar, somebody who can really teach these kids." I began teaching English at that time. So, be careful what you pray, because you might be the instrument God uses to answer your own prayer. Anyway, so back to Yugoslavia. We would go there every summer and sing in Greece, on the beaches of Greece, and had contact then with Yugoslav people. And we stayed in a camp in Leptokaria, Greece, which is not far from Thessaloniki. We went there, went to Thessaloniki, went to Athens. I got to see some of those places I'd only read about, I got to visit. And so what we would do is we would sing during the day in afternoons, because that's when the people would come down in the morning, they'd go home for lunch, and then they would come back in the afternoons and swim when it wasn't so hot. And then at night, they would go walking up and down the streets. You couldn't drive a car through the city because of all the people walking. And we decided that we would sell Bibles. We didn't give them away. because then they would have less value. If they had to pay something for it, then it meant more to them. And so they didn't know what they were purchasing, the price of what, the worth of what they were purchasing. So we had this table set up, and we sold Bibles, and that's what we do. Well, after I began teaching, I went on a trip to Yugoslavia to visit some of my friends there, to Zagreb. And there was a Bible school in Zagreb, and they asked me to speak. So I did. And at the end of it, a young man came up and he said, "I know you." And I said, "You do?" And he says, "Yeah." He said, "I went to Greece on a vacation. And one night I was walking up and down the street and you sold me a Bible." He said, "I read that Bible, and my family read that Bible, and I became a Christian, and my whole family came to know the Lord. And that's why I'm in Bible school, because you sold me a Bible for $1 in Leftocadia, Greece." You never know how God is going to use the least thing that you do for Him. He can take that and multiply it thousands and thousands of times more than you could ever imagine. And another time, it was after a concert, and the pastor's wife came up to me and she said, "Would you like to meet some of your fruit?" And I said, "What?" And she brought this young girl over, and the young girl said, "Yes, you and your team sang at my church last year, and I became a Christian that night, and I just want to thank you for sharing Jesus with me." And it's just a thrill to know that God is using you, being allowed to just be. It's all God wants you to be. Just be. Bloom, you've heard that old expression, bloom where you're planted. Well, that's so important. God will put you where He wants you to be. He just wants you to allow Him to be in you. And when I was in Hungary then, or how I got to Hungary, I was going through doing these mission trips during vacation times. When I was off of school, I was in Eastern Europe, still living in Germany, still teaching Black Forest Academy, but going into the Eastern Europe, smuggling Bibles. And that was an interesting experience too. I've got a lot of border stories that I could show you. I don't want to bore you with them. But I had the opportunity of traveling often and in many parts of Eastern Europe, carrying Bibles, carrying other things of value to Eastern Europeans. So when I took a group, there was a group that came through from the Army base. Actually, Tyler, what's his name? I'm sorry, I can't think of the name. The intern who was just here and went back to Czechoslovakia. Tyler, is his name? Anyway, we'll skip that policy. This group of young people came to our school, and so I was talking to them, and I said, "Would you all like to go to Eastern Europe?" And they said, "What?" And I said, "Yeah, I can take you. We could go in around Christmas time. If you want to go, I'll arrange a trip." So they went in and with me, and we traveled throughout Eastern Europe. It was winter, it was cold, we had so many really weird experiences, but the way that we would travel, it was illegal to stay in a home. You couldn't stay in anybody's home anywhere you were in Eastern Europe. So we would sign in to, summertime, we'd sign into a campground, put up tents, and spend all our time with believers. We'd go back and sleep in the tent. And in cities, we would register in a hotel. And sometimes we never even got past the first floor. It was we register and then we'd leave. So you had to have that stamp in your passport that you had been there. So they watched everything you did. under communism. So we had the freedom to travel, and because we were Americans, Canadians, and on vacation. So this one group that I took in, it was called Malachi, and they were the first other group that I took in besides the groups that I had organized. This was a pre-arranged group. So we went in and we traveled in Hungary, and I didn't speak Hungarian, and sometimes I was their translator. And so with your hands and your legs and your head and all this, you know some words, and so you get things done. So they had left and gone back to Germany, and I had stayed to spend New Year's with my friends. At that point, they were just friends in Hungary. So I was going through the woods, no electricity, so there were no lights. It was dark, just the moon, and snowing. It was a beautiful night, snowing, and just very beautiful. And I was talking to the Lord, and I said, Lord, you know, I just love these people so much, but this language, I just don't know. I would love to learn this language. And the thought came into my head from the Lord, what are you waiting for? And I thought, well, I don't know. What am I waiting for? So that night, I spent the night with some friends, and we were talking, and I told them about this conversation I'd had with the Lord. And they said, well, you know, we live right next to a very good language institute here at university, and you could stay with us and learn Hungarian there. And I said, wow, I hadn't thought about that. So I left there, and I went to the other place where I had visited more frequently, and a family that I knew quite well. So I was sharing with them this thing that God had put in my heart, that I wanted to learn the language. And so the mother of the family had just died, and the father lived downstairs. He spoke some German, and the husband and wife lived on the second floor, and there was an attic. And so they said, well, you could come here, and you could live in our prophet's room. They had a room that they had set aside for missionaries coming through to visit, and they'd stopped those visitations because of the death of the mother. And she said, I've been dreaming that the Lord is going to send someone to live in that room. And so I thought, oh, this is interesting. And she said, yeah, and you could learn at the University of Budapest, Hungary, here in Hungary, and live in that room. And how about it? So I prayed about it, and I went back to Vienna, where our field office was, and I talked with my field leader, and he said, you would go alone? And I said, well, yeah. He said, you wouldn't have any contact with any other Christians. And I said, oh, I know many Christians in Hungary. And he said, yeah, but you wouldn't have any support. And I said, well, I would have God. That's all the support I need. And they said, well, if you really want to do this, then we would approve it. So I went back to my school and told them that I was leaving, that I was going to move to Hungary. And that was in January, and I moved in April into that little room. But I moved in from a 5-room apartment into a 1-room room, the prophet's chamber. And I lived there, I guess 3 years. And then I moved out into an apartment. All this time, my things were stored there in a warehouse or something. So then I got my own place to live after that. But while I was living with that family, we built up their attic. We took the roof off. As a matter of fact, the day we had the roof off is the day that Chernobyl blew. And it rained that day. So we didn't know, we weren't close to Chernobyl, but we didn't know how much of that radiation was coming over, and the rain and all of that. And we didn't even know that it had blown. It was only later that we found out, and we thought, well, God protected us, and God is protecting us. So we built an apartment upstairs, and I lived there for the 3 years up there in that apartment. But then God kept calling me further east. There was a pastor that I knew. He was a gypsy pastor. And I tell you, if you get to know a gypsy who loves the Lord, you have someone who's on fire for God. Those people, I love gypsies. I'm a gypsy at heart. Anyway, I got to know this family and this pastor, and he said, we're starting to work in Debrecen, and that's about a 3.5 hour drive further east, right on the border with Romania. And he said, would you consider coming to Debrecen and working with us? And I said, well, yes, I would pray about that. And so God led me to go there, but just as I had moved there, this pastor that I was going to work with passed away. Such a precious, precious soul. But he passed away. So I got involved with the local church there, and I kept doing the ministry trips on the summertime, and we would travel with young people from all over, from the United States, from Canada, Germany, England, all over. They would come, and we would work through the summer and travel. And then the time came when, I know what happened. Communism fell. That was a biggie. That's when communism fell. And so I went with my family for the first time that they had ever voted in a free society. And I've got pictures of that. It was just amazing. It was so, so interesting. And I was so excited to see them able to express their opinion in a vote. And that was a really special time. So things began to change under communism. There was a little bit more freedom. We still had to be very careful whenever we crossed a border into one of the neighboring countries, because border crossings are very interesting things. You know, you don't talk unless you're spoken to. You don't look at anything. You just keep your head straight ahead, and you don't talk, and you don't make any sudden movements or anything like that. Well, we were going to cross with a group of kids into Hungary, and I told them, you cannot take pictures at the border, at train stations, military installations. You cannot take pictures. What happened if we take a picture? Well, they'll take your camera. Well, they can't do that. That's my camera. This is a Canadian boy. And I said, honey, if they see you taking a picture, they will take your camera. Well, he didn't believe me, but he didn't take a picture there. And so later I was able to tell him a story, because one of our dorm assistants had gone with me. We were traveling through Czechoslovakia, just the two of us, in a car, in an isolated spot, traveling across country, not in a city, nothing around, and a train was going by, big, long train. And so we were just sitting there talking, and she got out her camera and took a picture. And I said, you cannot do that. She said, well, why? I said, listen, if you want to save your pictures, take the film out of your camera right now and roll it to the end and take it out and put it in a new roll of film. They're going to come and get your picture, your camera. No, they wouldn't do that. About that time, the train stopped. The train backed up. They stopped at my car. They came to her side of the car. They asked for her camera. They took the camera, opened it up to expose the film, which was a new roll because I told her to do it, closed it back, gave it to her, got back in the train, and off they went. How on earth that in that long train, somebody just saw one girl in a car take a picture? But they knew. And so it was that type of thing. The family that I lived with, Janusz told me, he said, do you know what my job was in the Army? And I said, no, what was it? He said, I was lying down in the bushes or in a ditch by the side of the road, and whenever a foreign car would go by, I would write down the license number and the time. Every foreign car that went by was recorded. And that was his job in the Army. I mean, you just cannot imagine the lack of freedom that there is. And so another time, I was going from Hungary. I'd been in Hungary. I was going to Czechoslovakia. At that time, it was Czechoslovakia. I didn't know it, but the borders were together. Lots of times you have one country you're going out of, there's a border. Then there's what they call no man's land. And then you come to the new country, and there's a border. And you have to go through all that again. But this one was together, and I didn't know that. So I knew that I had some Hungarian money with me. And you can't take money from one country to the other country. So I had put it in the Bible inside the glove box. And so they were talking to us, and the guard realized I spoke German, so he was speaking to me in German, and he told me that they were going to take me to this little hut. Well, I knew what they were going to do. They were going to search me. And so, no, I had the money in my sleeve. And so I knew they were going to search me. Well, I just slipped it out and put it in the Bible inside the glove box. They didn't see that. So they took me over to the little hut and had me take off my sweater, and they looked through my clothes, and I was going back to the car, and I was excited and I was glad, and so I just started running back to the car, and all of a sudden I was surrounded by machine guns. Halt! And I looked around, and I was running from Hungary to Czechoslovakia. I did not know that. And so the border guards from both countries came at me with automatic rifles. And the German border guard, who knew I spoke German, said, sie trainiert. Oh, she's in training. He knew I was a PE teacher. and so he just told the other guards, don't worry about it, she's just in training. She's fine, let her go. That was a close one. that was a close one. And it was the same border station where they were asking us all sorts of questions. And my family had, that I was living with, had baked cookies. And so I was eating cookies. I had a plastic bag full of cookies. Well, there was nothing else to do while I was waiting. So I took out a cookie, and I was eating a cookie. And I got some crumbs on the desk where the officer was writing up our paperwork. And he looked up at me and gave me this dirty look, and then brushed the crumbs away, threw our paperwork all together, and told me to get out. So, I mean, you know, God can use anything. And another time, I was always carrying stuff. I was always taking stuff in and out of the country. And this particular time, I had a box of baby powder, different cartons of baby powder. But under that baby powder box were Bibles. And we had carefully stacked the things all around them, but if they'd taken out that baby powder box, they would have found the Bibles. So we got to the part where they were searching it, and I was standing right there by the trunk, and I knew they were going to move that box. And so I got a box of baby powder, and she looked like she was going to, I says, Baba, baby, you want Baba? And I gave her the baby powder, and she just closed the trunk and went away. So baby powder saved us that time. I mean, you just never know. God just absolutely would give you the answers to what you needed for that situation. And one more border story, and that's this one. I carried out of Czechoslovakia a traditional Czech bridal gown to a family member from whom they were separated in Austria so that she could have it for her wedding. Now that was the situation. Here's Czechoslovakia, and here's Vienna, and there's the Danube. And they could go to a point in Czechoslovakia, and they would go to a point in Vienna, and they could wave at each other. They couldn't speak. All they could do, but they would get a message to go at a certain time, and they would see each other. Well, this family was sending this family a traditional wedding gown. And I put it in a brown paper bag, just a regular old brown paper bag like we have here. I put it in the back of the trunk. And they were searching me at the border. And I thought, now how am I going to explain that? A Czechoslovakian bridal gown that I'm taking out of the country. They took everything out of the trunk except that bag. And then they told me, put it all back in. They never put it in for you. They always took it out and never put it back. They always go through your suitcase and never put it back. Told me, put everything back in and go. They got right to that paper bag. And I believe God just blinded their eyes. I didn't even see that paper bag. So, I mean, this was my life. And I loved every single minute of it. I loved the people that I was able to meet and to share with. But you see what God did? He fulfilled those promises that He had given me October 24th, 1976. Every single one of those promises that He gave me that night filled my heart and filled my life. And from that point, God allowed me then to be His servant. And I miss it. I would love to go back. That's not going to happen in this life. But in the next life, we'll be able to even speak to each other without an interpreter. That'll be really good. But I'm thankful. I'm thankful for the time that I had there. All of those things are in me. They're memories that I hold on to. And if you were to come to my room, you would see pictures around from different countries that remind me of the people that I loved and lived with there. And so that is still very much a part of my life. My heart is still very open to that part of the world. And things changed after communism, but not all that much. The government changed, but they were still communists. They didn't care if you called them Democrats. They were still in control. As long as they were in control, that was fine. So it's a lot more subtle now. But things are changing, and I'm just thankful. And thank you for letting me just ramble on. Yes.
So interesting to hear about your life. How many years were you over there?
32.
32.
I spent 32 years living for the devil, 32 years as a missionary, and now I'm on the third 32.
So what year did you come back?
I came back 10 years ago, and I've been like this for a year and a half. I never dreamed that I would be in a wheelchair. I went in for cancer surgery and came out with a lump leg that doesn't work. So, yeah, that's another story. But how can I go through that? And it's because the peace that He promised me in Isaiah 54 that has never left me. He's faithful and He's true. So, any other questions? I meant to open it up for questions all along. I've just been reminiscing.
What would, now at the border crossings, they would have found your Bibles, what would have been the punishment?
They would have taken them and could have put me in jail.
I figured.
Yeah,
Right, yeah.
they could have put me in jail. I was never discovered, and I carried thousands. Yeah.
I think you need to write a
Just,
book.
yeah. Have you ever read the book by Brother Andrew, God's Smuggler? Well, that's what I was. I was God's smuggler. There are very unique ways of getting things through. And like I said, a lot of times I think God just blinded their eyes.
Yeah.
Or used a stupid thing like cookie crumbs. Or running across the border, 2 borders. I couldn't believe I did that. But I did. And ignorance sometimes is a good thing. But, yeah.
Did you ever learn Hungarian? It's a very
Oh,
difficult
yes.
language.
Ha beszélek magyarul, biztos vagyok. Te nem tud érteni egy szó se. If I speak to you in Hungarian, I'm absolutely certain you cannot understand one word. Yes, I learned the language. Yeah.
Very difficult.
But you can't understand anything.
Where was the church in the Bridges Garden? Where is it in the little town or was it out?
It's at the army base. There's an army base right there on the Titazé.
We were all there.
Yeah,
at
yeah.
Bridges
I saw your pictures, and of course that's where I was saved. That's where God got hold of my heart. He took me halfway around the world to save my soul. And I'm so thankful. Yeah. You know, on the train, I'd never flown across the ocean, and flying over there to meet my family, I kept picking up my feet. I was reading a book. I read Rebecca, and I just kept my nose in that book the whole time. I just knew if that plane would go down, I'd go to hell. I knew I wasn't saved. I didn't know how to be saved. And I knew the plan of salvation, but it still was just here. It hadn't gotten into here. But I remember actually lifting my feet from time to time, just like I was nervous because it was over all that water. What happens if we go down? I knew what would happen. I'd go down and down. I knew that. So God was working. God never let me go. He never let me go. From the time He first called me when I was 8 years old, He never let me go. I let him go. I ran away from him, but he never let me go. It's just a testimony to God's faithfulness.
Well, Nina, in your last chapter, your last 32 years, you're still having an amazing testimony, amazing effect on so many people.
Well,
That's awesome.
you know,
We're privileged to know.
I'm here for a reason. I'm here for a reason. This last surgery that I had a year and a half ago was very dangerous, especially for me with my history. Doctor told me to get my affairs in order, high mortality rate. And I looked at him and I said, if I die on your table, it has nothing to do with you. It just means that it's God's calling me home. He says, I just don't want to be the instrument by which you go. But yeah, and you know, all of the 40-some surgeries, I've had peace, and it's hard to explain. But I've had cancer twice, 50 years cancer free, and then I found out I had cancer again a year and a half ago. So, yeah. Was I afraid? No. I was determined to get it out of me if I could, and they were successful. They got all the cancer. But when I woke up, I had no use of this leg, so that's why I'm in a wheelchair. Can't stand or walk. But I can move in my little electric scooter. I went to the drugstore yesterday by myself. I just got in it and I went down. I needed some air freshener, so I went to the drugstore.
Go girl.
So, anyway, I am able to move around. And I said, when I get to heaven, I don't know if they walk or fly. However they motivate, I'm going to be gone. I'm just going to run over to Hungary and over to Romania, see my friends, speak to them in whatever language God gives us. I'm looking forward to heaven. So, yes, ma'am.
Do you keep in touch with people over there?
I do.
I bet you do.
I do. As much as I possibly can, I do.
In their language, in the languages you've learned?
Well, I said I'd never write in German or Hungarian, but I stumble at it.
Okay.
So I know I make mistakes, but they can understand me. So I have one pastor's wife who sends me a daily devotional every day in Hungarian. Yeah, so that's really sweet. But yeah, we keep in touch. So let's pray. We'll close with God's word. Lord, you've given me so much. You have poured into me your love, your peace, your joy, and I thank you for that. Lord, I thank you that your word is true and that you are true to your word. And as you promised Moses that there would never be another flood, you promised me that I would have a flood of joy and peace in my heart, and I thank you for that. Thank you for the opportunity this morning to share. I pray that what we've shared here today would be an inspiration or an encouragement to those who are here. And Father, I just pray that you would continue to grow us together as family. This is my family, and I thank you for them, Father. I love them so much, and they've been so good to me. And so I thank you that you've placed me here in this body, and I just pray that you would go with us now. I pray, Father, that you would be with us throughout the next service, that your spirit would be alive and active, hearts would be touched and challenged. Thank you for your love. Thank you for your peace. In Jesus' name.